Okay, a good evening and a warm welcome to each one of you who has joined us this evening. I'm Leena, convener of RC32, which is on pedagogy, teaching and learning. This research committee, as some of you might know, seeks to provide an enabling space for dialogue and critical engagement with theoretical and empirical research, methods and methodologies, pedagogical practices, and reflective scholarship in the broad field of teaching and learning sociology. We do emphasize on a collective and collaborative mode of knowledge production. To the participants who have joined us today, we warmly invite you to become a part of RC32 and contribute to its deliberations. I think I must also take this opportunity to thank the lovely team that we have that enables a lot of these activities. First, a big thank you to our advisors, two of whom are here today, Professor Gita and Professor Rukmini. We also have Professor Anurekha and Dr. Joseph. I must thank my co-convener, Dr. Rupa, who I'm not sure if she has joined today, but I get a lot of support from her. And of course, thank you to all the RC members who are here for your immense support. And of course, the two people from ISS office without whom none of this would be possible, Boinu and Marcus. They really deserve a special mention. So this year, we initiated a collaborative series in which we partner with other research committees to engage with the pedagogies and epistemologies within the different domains of our discipline. As part of this initiative, we organized a collaborative session with Adhoc RC1 on teaching food studies. We also had a joint session with RC1 on Professor T.K. Umin and the making of Indian sociology. We also did a session on teaching sociology of religion along with RC6, which is sociology of religion. Today, we are delighted to host this with Ad hoc Group 2, which is on visual sociology. And I welcome Professor Satish Sharma, and I hope he has been able to join, and Professor Vaishali Divakar, the convener and co-convener of Ad hoc Group 2. And thank you to the both of you for this collaboration on a theme that I think is extremely pertinent. I think the part of the visual is immense, both in teaching and in research. It enhances the teaching learning process and has a transformative potential. And of course, we have a distinguished panel today, which will explore the idea of the visual both as a pedagogy and as a method of inquiry. Before I invite Dr. Vaishali Divakar to sort of talk to you a little bit about the theme, I think let me introduce the panel to you today. And of course, I begin with Professor Rukmini Sen, who is a moderator for this evening. Dr. Rukmini Sen is Professor and Dean, School of Liberal Studies and School of Heritage Research and Management at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, New Delhi. Her areas of expertise are sociology of law, sociology of kinship and intimacy, life writings as qualitative research method, and feminist pedagogy. Very recently, she completed a university-funded, which is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University-funded project on youth in Delhi, new living arrangements and friendships. Currently, she's project director for ICSSR research on women in middle tier leadership in Indian higher education institutions, futuristic directions for Viksit Bharat at 2047. She's the co-editor of a couple of books doing feminisms in the academy, identity, institutional pedagogy, and critical classrooms in India and the UK, and trust in transactions. She has edited and co-edited journal special issues, some of which include Resilient Solidarities, Feminist Experiences on Trust and Community Building. This is for Peace Prince, South Asian Journal of Peace Building. She has also edited a special section on sociology of law in Explorations, the e-journal of Indian Sociological Society, and of course, Power and Relationships in the Academia, Feminist Dilemmas Beyond the List Statement, Binary. This was for Economic and Political Weekly, and this was, of course, along with Dr. Gita Chadha. She is an elected managing committee member of Indian Sociological Society since 2026 and currently also the vice president of RC9 of the International Sociological Association. And RC9 is on social transformations and sociology of development. So welcome, Professor Rukmini. Well, our first panelist was supposed to be Professor Dalia, but I do not know at the moment if she has been able to join. So we will, of course, begin with Priyasha, but nonetheless, I will just do the introduction for Professor Dalia. Dr. Dalia Chakrabarti is Professor of Sociology at Jadavpur University. Her current areas of research include social history of Bengal, visual culture, study of food culture, urban studies, qualitative methods of social research. Her book titled Colonial Clerks, A Social History of Deprivation and Domination was published in 2005. Her research projects on medical advertisements, Acropolis, a study of urbanity in India, block bazaars of New Town, an ethnographic study, the incredible visuals and food anxiety, captured visual culture in diverse ways. In 2011, she was awarded the M.N. Srinivas Memorial Prize by Indian Sociological Society and the Indian Council of Social Science Research. Dr. Priyasha Kaul is Assistant Professor of Sociology. She's an ex-panelist and Deputy Dean at the School of Liberal Studies, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. She has a diverse profile with a master's and PhD in sociology, along with an MSc in management. She has worked on long-term research projects with the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Citizenship. This is at the University of Bristol. The Equal Opportunities Commission UK on Gender, Ethnicity and Employment, and the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, New Delhi, on Gender, Space and Survival. Her doctoral research and subsequent scholarship, I think she has engaged extensively with Hindi cinema and visual culture as sites for exploring questions of identity, gender, nationalism, diaspora, and belonging. She has also examined issues related to Kashmiri folk music, platform labor, sacred space, displacement, and everyday social life in contemporary India. I'll welcome you, Priyasha. And our last panelist, and she would like to come first, as she said, is Dr. Gita Chadha. She is sociologist and feminist scholar with over 3 decades of teaching and research experience across leading institutions, including University of Mumbai, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and currently at Azim Premji University. She's a pioneer in feminist science studies and has contributed significantly to science studies and feminist sociology. She was a key contributor to feminist archiving initiatives at SNDT Women's University and the National Center for Biological Sciences. She curated an interesting set of feminist conversations with scientists at NCBS, and I think I would urge everyone here to listen to those conversations. She has been a recipient of the Obek Siddiqui Chair at NCBS during 23-24, and also the recipient of the Ladli Media Awards that was just last year. I welcome you, Gita. I welcome all the panelists and the moderator and all the participants who have joined now. And may I now invite Dr. Vaishali to speak to you about the theme for this evening.
Thank you, Leena. Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all. She has already introduced us. I'm Vaishali Divakar. I'm co-convener of this Adhoc group, Visual Sociology. So before we begin our discussions on the visual as pedagogy and method of inquiry, I would like to briefly reflect on the theme that brings us together today. In recent years, conversations around pedagogy have become more important than ever. Teaching can no longer be viewed as a natural or automatic process where knowledge simply flows from teacher to student. The rapid growth of digital technologies, changing student demographies, the influence of social media, and the increasingly diverse and dynamic nature of our classrooms have fundamentally transformed how we teach, learn, and produce knowledge. So, as educators, we all feel that we are constantly challenged to rethink our methods and develop pedagogical strategies that foster engagement, critical thinking, participation, and meaningful learning experiences. At the same time, as we all know, we are living in an increasingly visual world. Images, videos, reels, films, digital platforms, and visual cultures, they have definitely shaped not only how we communicate, but also how we understand and experience social reality. And as sociology students, we all know that how important this is. This shift compels us to ask an important question, that how can we incorporate the visual into our teaching and research practices in meaningful and critical ways. It is within this context that visual sociology has emerged as a significant pedagogical and methodological approach within the social sciences. Traditional text-based approaches, while essential, are often insufficient to fully engage with the complexity and image-saturated realities of our contemporary worlds. Visual methods enable us to make abstract concepts more accessible, encourage active participation, and create opportunities for experiential and reflective learning. They help students connect sociological theories with everyday life and foster critical visual literacy, which has become an essential skill in today's world. And I'm sure everybody agrees with this. The importance of visual sociology extends beyond the classroom. Visual methods such as photography, visual ethnography, documentary analysis, video based research generate rich empirical insights into social life, often revealing dimensions that conventional methods may overlook. They encourage us to critically examine questions of identity, power, representation, inequality, and social change. At the same time, the use of visual methods also presents important challenges. Questions of ethics, consent, representation, interpretation, cultural bias, and even digital manipulation remind us that visual knowledge must always be approached critically and responsibly. Effective visual pedagogy, therefore, requires not only the use of visual materials, but also the cultivation of analytical and ethical sensibilities. It is with this spirit of curiosity, innovation, and critical inquiry that we have gathered here today to explore the possibilities and challenges of the visual as both a pedagogical practice and a method of inquiry. We hope that today's discussion will inspire us to rethink how we teach, how we learn, and how we understand the social world around us. So, with this, once again, I extend a heartfelt welcome to all and wish you a stimulating, engaging, and intellectually enriching event. So, without taking much of your time, I request now Professor Rukmini to take over the session. Thank you. Rukmini, please.
Thank you so much to both Professor Leena Pujari and to Professor Vaishali Divakar, RC32 and Adhoc RC2, for first of all organizing this very, very important discussion around pedagogic practices using the visual. Visual cultures, as we just now heard Professor Divakar saying, has actually engulfed the world of sociology in ways that was unimaginable when we were studying sociology. And there's a lot to learn, therefore, from students and what they bring through their discussions, and especially the assignments that they do, where they use the visual in multiple ways. That also pushes us as teachers and pedagogues to actually understand that world in a very, very big way. I'll in this before handing it over to the panelists, in some ways I'll just trace a little journey around the kind of texts that I got introduced to with respect to the visual in the last phase of studying MA in JNU, which was in the year 2000. And one of the books that Professor Maitri introduced us to was Irving Goffman's Gender Advertisements. And that was an eye-opening book, a 1978 book with an amazing cover. And one didn't know that advertisements could actually be interpreted in the way that Goffman did so many years ago. But then after that, of course, Professor Patricia Oberoy's Freedom and Destiny, Gender, Family and Popular Culture in India. That was another very, very significant book that as students of masters and also then postmasters engaging with sociology, this to look at calendar art again as a method of inquiry was something which was definitely very novel that Professor Patricia Oberoy introduced us to. And who can forget, again, Professor Patricia Oberoy's The Diaspora Comes Home, Disciplining Desire in DDLJ, the very important contributions to Indian sociology 1998 essay, which to me still remains the go-to article for a sociological engagement with films. Those of you here, especially maybe students, if you haven't read this, please make it a point to read it. The way she weaves in questions of, globalization, questions of aspiration and desire, and also questions of the complexities of tradition just through that film, Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, is just amazing. Then we, of course, have Professor Maitri Chaudhury's works, and there are many. But the two that has, in some ways, I have used quite a lot. One is Gender and Advertisements, the Rhetoric of Globalization. And the other book of hers, Refashioning India, Gender, Media, and the Transformed Public Discourse. The latter was published in 2017. And I'm happy to see that it's getting a reprint and, of course, must be updated, etc. So we are all waiting for that to also come through. But who can forget in the discussion around the visual world and cultures, to me, somebody who's not a sociologist, but at the same point of time, one would think that it is very difficult to not engage with Susan Sontag's work, especially the 1977 book on photography. And I would want to quote one really important and in some ways something that resonated with me a lot. When Sontag writes in this book, a capitalist society requires a culture based on images. Cameras define reality in two ways, as a spectacle for masses and as an object of surveillance for rulers, unquote. And finally, I'm sure those of you who teach visual cultures and sociology probably use John Berger's Ways of Seeing. How can we not read that? The 1972, originally a BBC television series of 30 minutes film, and it was 4 episodes, which becomes a book later on. It introduces the concept of male gaze to us and also becomes an important text for popular culture. Very recently, an article in the Indian Express by Professor Shumona Roy critiques Berger in a very interesting way from a South Asian context, which I'll reserve for after the panelists have spoken. I now invite Dr. Priyasha Kaul to start the proceedings. All the speakers will have about 12 to 15 minutes. I'll try and interject in some way at the 12th minute. Priyasha.
Thank you so much, Professor Rukmini. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much to Professor Rukmini, Professor Leena, Professor Vaishali, and everyone at RC32 and the Visual Culture Adhoc RC and the Indian Sociological Society in general. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be a part of this panel today. So the title of the talk that I would be discussing for this panel today is Learning to See Sociologically, Cinema, Visual Pedagogy, and the Social Science Classroom. And When thinking about how to structure this talk, I thought I'd primarily try and keep it experiential. So the structure of my talk will be as follows, just to give an overview. I will begin with talking about cinema as an entry point into visuality. I will then move on to talking about cinema as a sociological text. And alongside that, I will reflect on cinema as a visual pedagogy, both as a way of seeing as well as a method of inquiry. But perhaps before doing any of that, let me begin with a very personal and slightly embarrassing anecdote about my very own first encounter with visuality long before I had the language of visual sociology. So I remember I must have been 2 or 3 years old, and one day I asking my parents that if I've heard it's dark inside a cinema hall, then how do people see a film? It was, of course, a very simple and a very naive question, of a child who had clearly not been to a cinema hall until that point. But what I find interesting today, looking back, is that it takes me back to a very basic question, which is how do we see visuals and how do we see cinema in particular? In some ways, it was a question and a lifelong reflection since on conditions of seeing and visuality itself, on questions of light, darkness, projection, and visibility. Many years later after that, as a student sitting in a sociology classroom in the early years, I remember encountering the very, very well-known essay of Rola Barthes in Rhetoric of the Image. And that childhood curiosity then found a more theoretical form and format. So Barthes showed how images are not simply seen, they are read, they are framed, coded, composed, and interpreted. This is where my engagement with visual sociology begins, not simply with using visuals as teaching aids, but with a larger question, which is how do visual forms become meaningful pedagogically? And how do we teach students to interpret visual worlds sociologically? This question feels especially urgent today, as we just heard many of the senior colleagues talking about, because images and videos circulate through social media, advertisements, political campaigns, artificial intelligence, and the dreaded deepfakes. We often ask what is edited, what is real, what is artificial, what is manipulated, and there are often no direct or clear-cut answers to that in today's world. But having said that, sociology, our wonderful discipline, I believe enables us to take this discussion further. The issue is not only that some images today are manipulated. The deeper point is that, as we know, images have never been a neutral window into reality. Every image is framed. Every image includes something while leaving others out. A photograph freezes a moment in time, but it also hides that snapshot also hides what happened just before and just after it. So a documentary may claim to record reality, but it too involves choices, where the camera is placed, what is edited out, whose voice is heard, and how the story is put together. So in that sense, every image has always been a curated reality. This is also what makes cinema particularly such a fascinating medium for sociology to work with. Unlike, a photograph, I would argue, a cinema has never really claimed to be an unmediated, record of reality. From the very beginning, we consent to enter into a suspension of disbelief when it comes to cinema. We know that the images that we are watching have been constructed. The dialogue, sets, costumes, music, and narratives have all been carefully curated and put together. Yet, precisely because cinema is so openly constructed, it becomes sociologically significant. Cinema does not simply tell us something about society after the fact. It is not a second-hand mirror order reflection of society. Rather, it becomes a part of the conversation through which society understands itself. It is constitutive of the ongoing social dynamics. Certain kinds of cinema therefore emerge at particular historical points in time, not by coincidence, as we can all reflect around us, but because they are part of the ongoing dialogue of social change in that society at a particular time. For me, this has been central to thinking about cinema as a visual sociological text. A film is never only a story. It is a dense social world. It brings together image, sound, dialogue, a multi-layered medium of sound, dialogue, music, gesture, costume, landscape, bodies, rituals, emotions, movement, and action and performance. So how caste is made visible or rendered invisible, how class is marked, how nation is imagined, and how social change is negotiated through all of that. But of course, for this panel, the question is not just why cinema matters sociologically. The more important question is, what does cinema enable pedagogically? What does visual sociology allow us to do in the classroom? The pedagogical value of visual sociology, of course, does not lie only in making teaching more attractive, entertaining, and student-friendly. The use of visuals, the use of PowerPoints, which, of course, they're all very useful outcomes. But the significant and important, crucial contribution of visual sociology, the insight of visual sociology, lies elsewhere. And that is in helping students develop a sociological way of seeing. By this, I mean that visual sociology helps students to move from looking to interpreting. It helps them move from consuming an image to reading it as a sociological text. It opens up questions such as who is being represented and who is absent, what is being normalized and what is being erased, what forms of power are visible and what forms of power remain hidden. We already live in a deeply visual world. Students move constantly between reels, films, YouTube clips, Instagram posts, advertisements, political images, news media reporting, and AI-generated visuals. They already bring rich experiences of visual culture into the classroom. And perhaps sometimes they might be more familiar with it than we are, given the everyday surroundedness and immersion in that visual culture. So the pedagogical task for us as teachers today is not to assume that students do not know how to read images. Rather, it is to create a space where those everyday visual experiences can be reflected upon, questioned, compared, connected to sociological concepts and the social world around. So what does this mean in practical terms? In practical classroom terms, I found this usually involves three movements. First, before discussing a visual text, locating it historically and sociologically. So asking questions like, when does this film emerge? What kind of society is it speaking to? And what questions are we bringing to it? Second, while discussing the visual text itself, asking students to slow down the act of viewing and to make it intentional. To ask questions such as what is visible and what is absent, what is made ordinary and what is made desirable, and what is made uncomfortable, very importantly. And thirdly, after the discussion itself, to make the efforts to reflect upon the visual moment as a pathway to sociological concepts, so that a scene, a dialogue, a song, or an ending becomes a way of thinking about a lingering way of thinking about sociological discourses about caste, kinship, gender, migration, modernity, nation, so on and so forth. This has been an important part of my own journey, both as a researcher and as a teacher. In my own doctoral research many years ago at Bristol University, I looked at mainstream Hindi cinema and the Indian diaspora. I used mainstream Hindi cinema not as an illustration, but as a workable sociological data set. My concern was to understand how post-liberalization Hindi cinema constructed Indian diaspora, and how those representations related to broader social dynamics within Indian society. But to do this sociologically, it was not enough to pick a few well-known films and discuss them impressionistically. It required a systematic sociological method, a careful sample selection of commercially successful films for each year between a period of 20 years, developing an origin coding, sociological coding framework, conducting textual analysis, and then taking that data back to the interviews with leading filmmakers and experts from the culture industries to connect the cinematic text back to the social world. That research engagement with cinema has deeply shaped my pedagogy in relation to visual sociology. So while teaching cinema as a sociological text, the aim is not to ask, whether students simply like or dislike a film, or what is the message of a film. The challenge is to help classroom discussions move from more immediate personal response, sometimes an immediate affective response, towards a more structured sociological interpretation, drawing on method, evidence, comparison, context, and conceptual clarity. And in order to illustrate what I mean by this, let me offer two, brief real-life examples from the classroom from the recently concluded semester of a course called Cinema and Society in India that I designed and teach at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. And I hope these two sort of examples would pedagogically help explain what I've been trying to say. So the first is a simple but revealing example of a classroom discussions on reflecting on the changing meaning of the word Pardesi in Hindi cinema over the decades. Just one term, the single word Pardesi. In earlier Hindi films, especially in the 1950s and 60s, the Pardesi is the outsider, the city dweller who comes to the village, often corrupt, often sort of looking to take advantage of the village. But by the late 1990s and 2000s, in the context of globalization and post-liberalization Hindi cinema, the Pardesi increasingly becomes the Indian settled abroad, the aspirational NRI, the overseas Indian, the diasporic figure. So from being a corrupt Pardesi, the Pardesi becomes an aspirational figure. Just that one simple change or sort of transition, or charting out that transition of that word. So the axis of us versus them then sociologically pivots from village versus city in the 1950s and 60s to the more recent cinema, where the sociological conceptualization of the village and the non-West fades away from focus, making the axis primarily urban India versus the aspirational white Anglophone West. Through one word, just one word, and its changing cinematic usage, students began to trace larger sociological transformations around migration, rural-urban mobility, globalization, class aspiration, the imagination of the nation, the global geopolitics, and the changing meaning of Indianness. The classroom discussion then moves from an isolated song, a dialogue, or a character type alone to broader questions of mobility, belonging, and social change. The second example that I would like comes from the same course, and it comes from comparing regional cinema and mainstream Hindi cinema through films such as Sairat and Dhadak. At one level, extremely well-known films that I'm sure we've all heard of. At one level, both these films deal with intercaste romance and violence. They were supposed to be, Dhadak was supposed to be an adaptation of the Marathi film Sairat. But for me, the comparison has been pedagogically useful, not only because it shows the difference between regional and mainstream cinema, but it also allows students to ask a sharper critical question. What happens to the caste critique when it moves to a more mainstream pan-Indian cinematic form? Does it travel to a wider audience? Yes. But what is the cost of that travel? What gets softened, aestheticized, displaced, or made less uncomfortable? This is where the classroom discussion can move beyond representation itself to questions of cultural translation, market, audience, caste discomfort, and the limits of mainstream visibility. One way of discussing this in the classroom was to look very closely at the endings of these two films, both of which end by showing honor killings. In Sairat, the young intercaste couple is killed, and the film ends with their child crying and walking away, unclaimed on the street. In Dhadak, however, the ending changes. The so-called lower caste husband and the child are killed in front of the so-called upper caste wife, while she is spared and survives. The difference matters sociologically. In Sairat, the abandoned child makes visible the crisis of caste, kinship, patriarchy, and patrilineality. A child born of a so-called lower caste father and a so-called upper caste mother is not easily incorporated into the dominant patrilineal caste order. The visual force of the abandoned child opened up a classroom discussion on how caste is not only about marriage prohibition, it is also about lineage, descent, legitimacy, inheritance, deep-rooted prejudice, the reproduction of the normative social order, and so much more. In Dhadak, the survival of the upper caste woman at the end of the film and the killing of the husband and the child shifts the visual and emotional burden of the ending. It raises another set of questions for the classroom. Whose grief becomes visible? Whose body is made disposable? What happens to caste critique when the film retains the violence but changes who survives it? These are not questions with simple answers, but that is precisely why they are pedagogically powerful in a sociology classroom. This is what I mean by learning to see sociologically. The visual does not replace theory. Rather, it helps theory become visible, discussable, experientially graspable, and more understandable in multiple sorts of ways. Students begin to see how abstract concepts such as patriarchy, caste, nation, modernity, kinship, diaspora, and others are not simply terms in a text. They're not simply theoretical frameworks. They are lived, represented, embodied, narrated, and visualized. This requires structured question. What is the visual text doing? What the social categories are being mobilized? What historical context is relevant? What is the relationship between social structure? And what does the visual text enable us to make sayable and leave unsaid? The silences in between. So visual sociology can open up important questions with students about consent, representation, stereotyping, cultural bias, digital manipulation, and the politics of looking. Who has the right to represent whom? A question the sociology and many other disciplines have dealt with. When does visibility become empowerment, and when does it become spectacle? Although my own work has primarily engaged with cinema, as I was discussing earlier, I see cinema here only as an entry point into a broader sociological and pedagogical argument. The same sociological skills can be extended to other forms of visual sociology. For sociology, visual pedagogy offers a way of making classroom itself a site of inquiry. When students discuss a film, a photograph, a meme, or an advertisement, they're also bringing into the classroom their own memories, assumptions, locations, identities, and everyday visual worlds. The classroom becomes a space where students learn from the visual text, learn from the teacher, learn from one another, and all vice versa. This is why I would argue...
We'll request you to wrap up.
Just 1 minute more, yeah. This is why I would argue that visual sociology is pedagogically powerful, not because it simplifies sociology, but because it deepens it. It allows students to encounter complexity through something that appears familiar. A film song, a poster, a scene, a family photograph, a viral meme may seem ordinary, but under sociological attention, the ordinary becomes dense with meaning. To conclude, therefore, I return to the question with which I began. If the cinema hall is dark, how do we see the film? Perhaps for us as sociologists, the answer is that we see through categories, histories, memories, inequalities, desires, and social locations. Visual pedagogy then is not merely about bringing images into the classroom. It is about teaching students to recognize and engage with the social worlds that images contain, conceal, produce, and circulate. It helps them learn to move from image to concept, from scene to structure, and from cinematic moments to social processes, and ultimately learn to see images sociologically. And I will end with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Priyasha Kaul, for sharing this such rich discussion around the course that you have developed on cinema and society in India, but also the ways it has been accepted, engaged with in the classroom, and connecting it to your own PhD work many years ago. And how does all of this come together with, as you started off with, and I think that those three were very, very valuable analytical points of departure: cinema as visuality, cinema as sociological text, and finally, cinema as a visual pedagogy that sociologists can use. And I do think, Priyasha, that through your presentation, you actually gave us responses to all three of these from where you began. So thank you very much. Before I ask Professor Dalia Chakrabarti to start her presentation, I hope, ma'am, you are here.
Yes.
Yeah. So I should say something about the panelists today. The fact is that Professor Dalia Chakrabarti is my senior in Presidency College and my teacher at Presidency College. Dr. Priyasha Kaul is someone with whom I am teaching at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi, now with her for at least more than a decade. And of course, Professor Gita Chadha, in some ways changed life and the way of looking at sociology since the 2014 Bombay conference. And of course, it has been wonderful working with her together in some of our own exciting pedagogic experiments that we have done till now. There are ways in which, I do think that these kinds of relationships that sociology enables us to build across cities and across ages, and of course across pedagogies, is something which is really valuable for us to learn. With that autobiographical note, I would like to request Professor Dalia Chakrabarti to please start her presentation.
Thank you, Rukmini. Good evening, everybody. It was a total non-cooperation on the part of my laptop, so I was struggling. But at long last, with the help of my daughter, I managed. Okay. Actually, I like to show you some images, so I like to share my screen. Okay.
Hi, Professor Dalia. So glad you could make it. What I'll do is I'll make you the co-host so that you can you'll be able to share screen.
Right. So I would like to locate first the core pedagogical benefits of doing sociology with visuals. Uh, First is deeper comprehension. When learners actively construct visuals like photographs, video, charts, diagrams, they connect new ideas with their pre-existing knowledge. Deep understandings are gained when students or researchers generate visuals as knowledge. Second is enhanced engagement. Breaking of monotonous dry lectures or textbook text with infographics sparks curiosity and maintains attention. Sociological theories and abstract concepts require concretization. We may screen or we may just discuss movies like Mulk or the recent film Main Vapas Aunga to discuss communalism, youth culture, partition, refugee crisis, intimacy and relationship, memory and identity. Photographs and movies can stimulate discussion and actually increase participation. Third is inquiry-based learning. That means it encourages students to ask questions, solve problems, and investigate concepts rather than just memorizing facts. Fourthly, collaborative learning that focuses on group discussion, peer feedback, and shared problem solving to improve social and academic outcomes. Work allows one to improve his or her own skills. Discussion can make the students aware that a variety of perspectives exist. Fifth, experiential learning by connecting visual images to lived experiences. It facilitates visual insight into our own social lives, challenges us to think and see the world in a new way, and brought invaluable research experience through our engagement in the social as well as research process as both participant and as researcher. It helps us grow as researchers, as sociologists, and also as individuals. And finally, improved retention. Look, participation, collaboration, real world application, all these require hard mental effort, resulting in better long term recall. In the history of human cultures, the dominant form of communication has not always been verbal or written. As example, the visual cultures predominated in 17th century Holland, or the emphasis of drawing of characters in the Chinese or Japanese languages, or modern photography culture of the West. Barger, on the front cover of Ways of Seeing, asserts, I quote, "Seeing comes before words." Due to rapid expansion of digital technologies and growing influence of social media, visuals have now become integral to our life. From surveillance through CCTV to selfies and smartphones, marketing, branding, politics or activism, education, information, identity or representation, every form of communication, all these invariably contain visuals, still as well as moving. Visuals provide us with both objective as well as subjective information. The act of viewing.
Interrupt once, ma'am. Okay, your screen, your PPT has now moved. I was just wondering whether we are not being able to see.
No. Actually, I'm showing it right now only.
Thank you.
So, the act of viewing and its subsequent interpretation entail emotional engagement with photo or a film, but it can also be conceived as impersonal record of behavior. Like this image, this is obviously, you can understand this is in the context of tsunami. This stimulates you emotionally. But it is also a record that the lady is there, the dead body is there, and the sea beach is the venue of this whole experience and venting of one's emotion. Now, this is an NDTV photograph of the civil society outburst following the brutal sexual assault on 16/12 at Delhi. It also records the activists who were there and the protest space, which is just close to the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and also authorities' response, like the water jets are there. Now, visuals have direct impact on viewer. It communicates transcending many barriers, including language. Here, words are not needed to understand the grief or to understand the defiance on the part of this activist, despite the freezing jets of water in chilly Delhi. That it was December, you all know. Now, seeing offers us possibility for empathy as well. And this capacity might also have a persuasive potential, leading towards some form of social activism and maybe reconstruction. This may eventually empower all those exposed to visuals to bring about social change in a desired direction or to resist any attempt to harm, just like this. So, seeing, looking is also embodied as undertaken by someone with an identity. Thus, visual meanings are both personal and framed by wider contexts and processes. So, as a student of sociology, we must know how and why the visual is created, what it encodes, what is its impact, intended as well as unintended, and how, underlying the appearance or form of objectivity of an image, there is a deep structure of meanings which are essentially subjective in nature. Students must learn to link the photographs or other visuals to broader sociological themes and consider the connection between their own experience and bigger issues in society and history. Then these are practical exercises of sociological imagination. While using images produced by others, the students must be aware of the underlying subjective position. Now, Foucault identifies the structural connection between knowledge and power. Both modern social science and the institution of modern state have used photography to define a category of people with specific characteristic attributes, and this construction serves their own agenda. Now, this is an advertisement of MetroCard. This is apparently gender neutral ad, but if deconstructed, it reveals the way patriarchy establishes hegemonic gender norms. Why women, not men? Why sari-clad traditional image of women? Maybe to convey that handling MetroCard is so easy that even women, the old-fashioned woman, able to manage it, that too with a smile. Visuals are polysemic as its meanings differ. The photographer, painter, sculptor, advertiser, that means the producer of visuals, have their meaning. Those who have been photographed have their own version of the event. Similarly, the viewers, other than the photographers and the photographed subjects, may have quite different take of the event. And all these interpretations are subject to change over time and in different contexts, and there is no question of primacy of one particular meaning over the other. That's why banks say that photographs are open documents. According to McQuarrie, the multiplicity and ambivalence of the meanings of images and its simultaneous appearance of objectivity and subjectivity, the issues we just dealt with, questions the modern notion of truth as authentic and thereby destabilizes the basic premise of modernity. So in a class on postmodernity, usually theoretically heavy and abstract, you may use an image to make your point. We may understand the major shifts in sociology through sociology's approach to visuals. Like the founding fathers of sociology, they didn't use visuals and produced abstract images of society. Though social sciences extensively used visual metaphors like structure, like network, depictions were rarely used. Even Chicago School didn't use it in their field research. Then from 1960s onwards, there was slow and hesitant incorporation of visuals in sociology. For positivists, a photograph can be just an objective record of facts. The modern project of social science assumes that while information may be recorded visually, knowledge is produced through translation of this data into written text. That means there is hierarchy of knowledge. The postmodern emphasis on specificity and experience and recognition of the fact that both films as well as written texts are social constructs and fictions created in 1980s a favorable environment for visuals. The critiques of the critiques of positivism focus upon the impossibility of true visual record. Reflexive analysis should focus not only on the content of the image, which we call the internal narrative, but on the meanings that different individuals, that is the producers as well as the viewers, give to those images in different contexts. And the outcome is a thick description. Thickness is created by the ability of the visual description to transmit what is really being said. In the 1990s, we locate a shift in social science from word and sentence-based thought to image and sequence-based thought. Thus, the modernist hierarchy of knowledge has been questioned. If we are using visuals to understand society, then we must develop skill to analyze it. Semiotics is one. A sign can be a word, a sound, or a visual image that stands for something else. Rather than simply locating the meaning, it decodes the way through which the meaning is encoded. The meaning may remain hidden in the deep structure of the text. Saussure divides signs into two components, signifier, in this case the image, and the signified, which is the concept the signifier represents or its meaning. I always give my students sign analysis as class assignment. They select image and locate the signifier and signified, bring out the denotation and connotation. Though one begins the decoding exercise with the image he or she has selected, eventually many students, including me, locate additional meanings or completely different meanings. Those who do not offer new meanings, even they actively participate as viewer and listener. Thus, classroom automatically becomes a venue for collaborative learning, active learning. Another way of interpreting visual is discursive approach that takes into account the broader role of a discourse in culture. It primarily deals with politics of an image, that is, its consequences. If you want to teach, say, development, particularly in Indian context, this one can be a classic example. This is Vijayan's treatment of the theme of failed development in pre-liberalization period, and I'm borrowing it from Deva Dawson. This panel is divided unequally between the muzzles of two cannons. The shorter muzzle carries the label Bofors. So students must know the whole discourse around Bofors to understand this. The longer and the more menacing muzzle wears the label starvation in Kalahandi. Again, students should know what Kalahandi represents. A speech bubble above the muzzle of the larger cannon asks, how many can you kill? Vijayan is clear that the horror of deprivation symbolized by Kalahandi is the real killer. It represents the degradation of the masses of the rural poor and the systematic collapse of human and economic progress after independence. Although modern social and political movements emphasize the visibility of their action, as indicated by the fact that protest space is always covered by journalists and photographers, the visual dimension of protest is, with few exceptions, still a nascent field of research. This is again NDTV photograph of the same civil society outburst after 1612 Delhi gang rape. Now the text of the most prominent placard indicates that the protesters identified themselves with nation and their activism with national awakening. This justified their movement against the sexist, hence undemocratic nature of state or government. The most commonly used material, visual material, are the banners, posters, placards, where the protest messages were written. The difference of the writing style and the design indicates that some protesters were organized, while some others are unorganized and spontaneously they joined without any preparation. This is also something very common in protest site. Much of the confrontation in the protest space is symbolic and performative. This concept first proposed by Feldman and then refined by Rhodes and Juris. To examine performative violence then is to conceptualize street protest as street theatre. Burning of effigies or damaging police vehicle are nothing but street theatrics of protest, which are not so much directed at an immediate antagonist, maybe the police, as they are at an unseen audience, the older public, the politicians, the administrators, men of judiciary, for example, who are far removed from the protest space. You may find real physical harm too. Now, visuals can also be considered as a tool for what we may call visual activism. I have used the cartoon from Karnika Kahan Aam Ladke of India cartoon series by Karnika Mishra. When she got the word that a popular religious leader Asaram Bapu had been accused of raping the 16-year-old daughter of two of his followers, she reacted in the most powerful way she could. She posted cartoons on her Facebook page. The message she gives is loud and clear that so long as the guru continues with his wrongdoing, she'll continue exposing him through her cartoons. What is evident here is that the visuals may significantly contribute to form a counterculture and act as a critical apparatus to overturn the entrenched system, in this case patriarchal mainstream. Hence, visual activism must be taken as a kind of transformative pedagogy to help people alter their mentality and concomitant practices. Next, visual research. Bank talked about two types of visual research. One is the use of image to study society. Another is sociological study of images. Actually, images reveal some sociological insights not accessible by other means. Visuals allow certain changes in social research. Primarily, the redefinition of the relationship between the researcher and the informant in the form of a collaborative approach. This is incorporation of the postmodern approach that begins with the idea that the meaning of the photograph is constructed by the maker and the viewer, both of whom carry their social positions and interests to the photographic act. Unlike the objectifying approach of positivistic method, that is the top-down model of research, which does research on but not with people, here the agency becomes shared between the researcher and the informant. Participatory visual method enables socially excluded individuals to claim recognition and an affirmative social presence, thereby empowering them for appropriate social action. Visual methods can actually facilitate participation because it's easier to relate oneself with images than with abstract academic text. There are certain limitations of visuals as well. Practical issues like the cost and the skills required for using certain technologies and storing visual material, morally, politically wrong or unintended use, particularly in case of images of women, children. Then technological expertise may enable somebody to deliberately distort reality. Camera may invoke rapport. leading to their inability to act naturally. They may not open up and often even misguide the researcher by striking artificial poses. In general, as Goffman told us, human beings do not like to see the mundane. Validity, reliability, objectivity can hardly be maintained in visual method. Like any other qualitative method, one may not be able to exactly measure reality using it. It contributes largely to understanding and sensitization.
Professor
Photo-
Chok, request you to wrap up.
Yes, this is the concluding section. Photographs do not speak for themselves. Rather, it is words which give meaning to images. Sole dependence on it may result in a partial and even distorted understanding of the world. This is true about every method of social research. Hence, the researcher may decide on triangulation of method. It is necessary to make meaningful links between different research experiences and materials, visual, verbal, as well as written, to produce a total message. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chakrabarti, for sharing with us at least in very in-depth engagement with photographs, advertisements, and cartoons, and from moving from cinema to these three different other forms of using visual methods. I'm sure we are only building upon an understanding that how diverse the range of visual materials are that sociologists can use, but also extremely grateful for bringing in not just the importance of using visual methods as a pedagogy, but the way it has the possibility of changing the classroom, but also to talk about the ethical concerns around the use of visuals. And I personally feel that is something which students really need to also learn, as more and more of them think of using the visual as a more easy tool of doing sociology, using the visual as an easy method of doing sociology. So thank you very much for bringing all of that on board. We'll move to our last panelist, Professor Gita Chadha, who also has a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, hi. Hello, hi Rukmini. Wonderful to be here. Thank you, Leena. Thank you, Vaishali. And thank you, Rukmini. Also, my co-panelist, Priyasha and Dalia. Wonderful to be with you, except that I am not a visual studies scholar and I'm quite intimidated to be here. I'll just draw upon a long journey of pedagogy, sociology. I still remember the early days of 80s, and when I first started teaching, the use of the visual was rather limited to using it as a tool, and that was an illustrative tool. So if you wanted to show poverty, you showed a documentary. You wanted to show, status of women, you showed a documentary. So the documentary was one very important tool that we had. And then, of course, there were the school residue of school practices of, making charts that students would do, and we would have them displayed. So that was a way of sort of entering or bringing alive a non-textual mode of pedagogy, which was the visual. Then, of course, my own journey shifted because I became keenly interested in visuality. Of course, as Rukmini mentioned, it was the shift that happened in sociology from moving from media to an understanding of popular culture. And we spoke about Patricia's landmark text and also Sumati Ramaswamy, which came later, Beyond Appearances. So my engagement with popular culture sort of emboldened me a little more to the teaching the visual in a more critical mode, in a more contemporary way. I think today I am at a pedagogic space where actually it's very interesting. It's a new pedagogic space. It's a private university. So there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of focus on pedagogy. So, we are encouraging ourselves and our students to use, Canva, use Zines, use, extremely, enriching ways of presenting work, which I think has been, for me, much more of a learning experience also. So I think today I'm somewhere in between using it both as a tool at some level, though the tools have got very advanced, and I still try to go back to the chart paper, but still the tools have gotten very, very advanced, and also to use the visual as a social text. So I come from somewhere there. I think I'm going to focus, Rukmini, on another visual practice, which is the practice of painting. Okay, to some extent, because that's what also I've been working with. I've been working with artists, feminist art practices, thinking about it. So I've been trying to bring that into the classroom. It does become a bit difficult, but it's interesting. Let me try to now. I actually have a PowerPoint. Oops, see, I said I have one, but I don't know how. 1 minute. Yes. Can you see? Is the screen available? I mean,
yes, Gita, we can see. Yeah.
All right. That was my giveaway visual, which I just incorporated. By the way, I have a student of mine here, Shivani, who also has been very participative in the work that I might show today if I have the time. So I've titled it, of course, Beyond Illustration, Visual as Social Text in the Sociology Classroom. And before, I want to start with a few thoughts that I want to put at the table about unpack. I don't have a paper, but just a few thoughts on unpacking and problematizing the term visual. So, I have a severe visual impairment, and I've had it since I was very young. So this ability to see, based on giving or receiving sensory information, which is sight-based, it could be information about space, where you are, it could be about a body, it could be about object. I've had a very difficult relationship myself with it, what happens if I cannot see? Yeah, which is, or if I just remove my glasses, what happens? Yeah. So just a word of caution here on the question of diversity in the classroom to address visually disabled students. And so that has been also a lot of engagement on the sentence, I see. What does it mean to be a visually impaired student, a person, and say, I see? So the sense in which I see is used here is obviously, as we know, about comprehension and about conceptual understanding of something, right? Yet the question of the epistemic privilege of seeing must be questioned, and we should, as we engage with visuality, these are some other kind of ethical questions that I'm sure we are all engaging with, but we need to keep that centrally in many of our conversations. And I'd like to share an anecdote in my experience in master's class, gender class actually, on sexuality, where I had a visually impaired student, and I was, doing the feminist thing about let's go back into our own personal archive to understand when we became conscious of our own gender and sex, how did we become conscious, and the conversation shifted to understanding of the physicality of the body and how we understand. Many of us spoke about, the genitals and a physical understanding when you're young. And the visually impaired student of mine actually said, it's interesting that for me, gender came through language, because I knew that somebody was in Marathi Tai, which means sister, and somebody was Dada, which means brother. But she said and shared in class saying that I couldn't really know, I didn't know the difference, till my grandmother took me when I struggled, and she says our grandmother took her to a young, newly born cousin or nephew, I don't remember, and actually made her touch the body and touch the genitals to show that, look, there's a difference between the male and the female. And that's when you realize how much touch is an epistemic site for a visually impaired person, and how language is as probably important. So after that, a little bit of a confession and a disclaimer. I will share with you some of the principles that I've found myself using in our craft of teaching visual as social text, sociologically. So I draw upon the phenomenologist, philosopher Merleau-Ponty, who says, I'm not in front of my body, I am in my body, or rather, I am my body. So the tactility, the embodiment, rather than the seeing of the image, which a lot of theory in sociology, for example, the looking glass self and all of that, speaks about how we see the social self, the whole looking glass metaphor and all of that. And so I draw upon Merleau-Ponty, who sort of shifts us a little bit from there to talk about the experientiality of the body as a site of knowing. Then, of course, Rukmini mentioned, Dalia, I think, also mentioned John Berger, the classic ways of seeing, where he talks about, interestingly, how seeing comes before words. Yeah, and the child looks and recognizes before it can speak. And Berger in here is highlighting the importance of the visual over the verbal. And he talks about how the textual has been a very important and very privileged, centralized way of knowing or way of making discourse in Western modern cultures. And he would urge us to move from word to visual. But I want you to keep in mind why I started with Merleau-Ponty also. Then in the film Caves of Forgotten Dreams, made by Herzog, both Herzog and Clotis, the historian, arrive interestingly in a conversation in the film at the idea about how the Paleolithic people actually drew images in this 32,000-year old cave that they talk about before they spoke words. And that challenges the idea of, they challenge in the film the idea of Homo sapiens, which means that we are distinguished as a species because of our ability to think. Whereas Herzog and Clotis invite us to say that probably it's not our ability to think, but our ability to imagine, which is imaging. Yeah. So in a way, they shift the focus from science to actually art as distinguishing us from Homo sapiens as Homo sapiens. But Clotis, of course, complicates this by going into talking about Homo spiritualis, which I won't go into right now. So the phenomenologist, Merleau-Ponty, who's speaking about body, John Berger, who's speaking about centrality of the visual over the verbal, and Herzog and Clotis, who take us back to caves of 32,000 years back, and how people were actually painting images, drawing images before they were speaking. Some further principles that I draw upon in my craft of teaching the visual as social text is, as Donna Haraway, the feminist philosopher, historian, feminist scholar, says that in her critique of modernity, in a way, what Berger is also doing and what Herzog and Clotis are also doing, and so is Ponty. But what Haraway argues is that in modernity, what we have done is we've developed a cannibalistic eye, which is an epistemological metaphor that she uses to talk about an eye which plays the God trick, which is an eye which is objective, which is an eye which is neutral, which is from nowhere. However, as some of us might know, Haraway argues that all vision, all seeing is seen from somewhere. And I think that's what we've heard in the last presentations also, that we don't see from nowhere, we see from somewhere. That is, all vision is embodied, as Ponti says, it's situated. But the important thing that Haraway says, it's partial, which means not that it's biased, but it's always part of the whole. So I feel that Haraway gives us also a way to looking at the visual, we don't, but we tend to sometimes need to correct objectivity of the visual, of seeing itself and of the gaze of modernity. That none of these, the visual or the act of seeing or the gaze of modernity, are objective. And of course, Rukmini also mentioned Laura Mulvey, our favorite feminist cultural theorist who's worked a lot on media. All of us know about her, on the idea, and she talks about the idea of the gaze. Here, of course, male gaze, which also, of course, Bourdieu also refers to. But I guess there is a sharpness in the way the feminist historian will look at it, or theorist. And she says that in a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between the active male gaze and the passive female object that we gaze upon. And we know that Bourdieu also speaks about how the woman herself looks at herself with a gaze rather than knowing her body for itself. I also draw upon Manju Chira, who says in her ideas on developing the transgressive and radical potential of an anti-caste aesthetics, she argues saying that Dalit filmmakers are being and becoming an aesthetics of experience rather than mere perception of beauty. And we know that the Dalit standpoint, that is coming into cinema, whether it's a film like Karnan, where you see the entire aesthetics actually changing. It's not only the content, or you see, of course, Priyasha, I think, before to Sairat and Manjuli. So you see, and from visual arts, for example, there are visual artists who are now beginning to question the language of visual aesthetics itself. Yeah. So now I will go into my own ways on how did we teach visuals of various kinds. So this is a visual, right? Pie charts, diagrams, these are all visuals, and they help. They help depending on the audience that you're speaking to. I don't use it much in my sociology classroom because I resist a certain kind of quantitative statistical method. But I need to use it often when I'm talking to scientists or science students, because that's my domain. So now, how do I tell this data? And I clearly tell them, look at the use of color, look at the use of everything, blah, blah. But I also tell them that this is a story which tells us other stories of exclusion, of marginality. This is data. Sorry, I haven't had the time to put the sources. This is about men and women's participation in science, yeah, in India. Yeah. So this sort of visual becomes a good peg for a mind that has been trained much more to the visual, which the scientific mind, quote unquote, sadly gets trained. Here is another visual. And this is a visual photograph that many of us recognize, yeah? Of the Bhopal gas tragedy, Raghu Rai. The question, of course, is what is this visual telling us? How do we look at it? Who was Raghu Rai? What happened in Bhopal? Do we just look at it as a human tragedy? Do we look at it as a political one? Becomes a very, very interesting. But the visual is different from the one that I showed you earlier. If I can, let me try and play this.
if you have it separately, if the link is separately open, maybe you could share screen with that. Is this a YouTube video?
I don't think this will play here, right?
Oh, it has to play?
No, Gita.
Jesus Christ, what a disaster. Anyway, I saw it again. I'm so sorry. Are you able to see the rest now?
I think, no, Aisha, if you have it.
Link on the chat
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. It's just a short film. I mean, I don't want to talk about the film, see the film. But is my PPT still working?
It is. Maybe you go to the next slide and we'll understand.
Okay. What do I do?
Just go to the next slide, Gita.
That I will. Yeah. So, but please see this. It's a short video film, silent in the sense it's without words. There are sounds, but it's without words, and it would be a very interesting thing to actually do. Use Merleau-Ponty, use Haraway, use Mulvey, use all of the people that we've talked about to see how this gets unpacked in the classroom. It's a very powerful little video.
Sir, Gita, if you go to the full screen mode, sir.
If you can start wrapping up, Gita.
Start wrapping up. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to report on one quick experiment where I use a lot of this using Judy Chicago's dinner table, which was an installation that Judy Chicago made in 1979, where she had used the idea of what women do, which is, cook and serve dinner. And she used this triangular table instead of a circular one or a rectangular one. There were no heads of table here. She had 39 placemats that she embroidered using craft, and she had the vulva, which was a symbol that was there in many of these table mats. It was a way to retrieve. There was Hypatia, the Sojourner Truth, Virginia Woolf, and actually Kyle also. Now, what I did is I persuaded, with a lot of reluctance, some of my students to take this installation and innovate around it. And the themes were campaigns from the women's movement. And this is what one of the groups, and Shivani is here, one of the groups did. They had different tiles, and they actually made pink chaddis out of clay. They had these themes, violence, and they painted on it. They made then there was Sri Ram Sene, then there was digital feminism. I won't go into it because of lack of time. Then there was mailing the chaddis, then there was solidarity, then there was critics. And then there was the entire installation. You will see there were these table mats which they had made to represent different phases of the movement, and they had actually painted it, and there were boys and girls involved in it. There is a table runner, which each one of us was actively asked to come and write upon. So it was a very interesting way, but it was also a way of talking about Judy Chicago's work and what a transgressive feminist art or aesthetic practice may look like. Another experiment, which I will wrap up really quickly, was N. Pushpamala. We all know how she does its ethnographic performances and her work, Native Women of South India. This I have used extensively to encourage students to actually come and perform. Yeah, adopt a character. There have been people who've done Savitribai Phule. There have been people who've done once, I remember, Brides of India. So, but subversives. There was this Muslim young student of mine who did a very traditional performance. She dressed up as a bride, and then her legs were exposed with tiger pants, and she performed this, took photographs of that performance like Pushpamala does. The body became the site of that performance. And of course, this draws from Raja Ravi Verma, who defined a certain kind of visual sensibility for us in modern India, which was a hybrid of traditional work and modern aesthetics and art practices, visual art practices. Pushpamala, we know, does a fantastic series called Mother India. Yeah. And so this gets transformed, and here it is, one of the transformations. I don't have time to go through this in detail, but this was a project on modernity and visuality, and this was a way to introduce Raja Ravi Verma to the students. And here is my student Lavanya Nandi, who modeled. Actually, she actually modeled in the classroom, but this was something that they did visually using digital. It was hilarious because they'd done some very, very interesting stuff with it, where they placed themselves in the work and embodied the time, the period, the character. Yeah. So that's really, let me end by saying that I feel that visual is an extremely powerful tool, but an even more powerful social text for us to make, break, and remake the social conditions of our life worlds, our classrooms, and our teaching learning practices. Sorry, did I take too long, Rukmini? I'm so sorry.
Not at all, Gita. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. So I'm sorry for having asked you to cut short, but thank you so much for that amazing set of pedagogic experiments and experiences that you shared with us today. And maybe before opening this up to a few questions and comments from our audience who has waited here and listened patiently to all the three really, really wonderful engagements. It was, from cinema to from where we began, to Professor Chakrabarti's photographs, advertisements and cartoons, to you, Gita, around, starting off with making charts, actually reminded me that one of the assignments that I loved doing in Ambedkar University, Delhi, was to use charts and do collages. And so use the chart paper for the collage. Very interestingly, this year, for the first time, I dropped the chart collage and introduced the zine. And, in some ways, and actually wrote that use Canva to figure out how to work on the zines. But I do feel that where you ended this, this experiment of installation is such an important thing to learn from. Also because we tend to feel that installation or exhibitions are actually a space which probably people doing culture and creative expressions, arts, aesthetics, heritage research, conservation practitioners, they will be the ones using it. But as you ended, how is it that we are using visual for making and breaking pedagogies? I did feel that ending with installation was amazing. And it, in a very different way, it reminded me of something that I tried when we were during lockdown, and it was a difficult phase to actually do assignments with students. And for a course on relationships and affinities that I have been teaching at AUG for many years, I asked students to actually use only their camera and to create visuals like something like a video essay. And I pushed some of them to think if they would want to make Insta pages with that. And of course, to actually engage with questions of home, lockdown, fractures maybe of intimacies that the lockdown gave us. And I can't tell you how amazing, those set of assignment falls short as a word for what the students created, really. Which brings me come to the last thing that I wanted to say, and thank you so much, Gita, for actually bringing in the hierarchy of seeing in sociology, starting with the ethnographic dominance of observation. And as I said in the beginning, very recently I read Professor Shumana Roy, who is actually an English language teacher in Ashoka, critiquing Berger's ways of seeing and asking, what did Berger not see? And she's someone who works a lot around plants. And she did talk about the plant blindness in Berger's ways of seeing, where she said that in a post-industrial, human-dominated world, one forgot how to notice nature as an active entity, and nature kind of remains as if only as a scenery. And I felt that in some ways that actually also spoke to something that Priyasha talked about in her presentation, where she did say that when we engage with cinema, it is not just image, sound, dialogue, but it is also landscape. And landscape, I'm sure, not just as natural beauty, etc., but how is it that the landscape is actually talking to the historicization of the movie, in this case, the cinema that is happening. But I think I'll end there. There's a lot that has come in from the three papers of the importance of using visual as a tool, but also the possibilities of sociological pedagogy being enriched as a sociological imagination, as in fact Professor Chakrabarti said. I think that is something that we are left with at the end of these three very, very rich interventions. I open it up for some quick comments and thoughts. We'll take it all together, and then I'll go back to each of the speakers for responses. Can I request to maybe switch on unmute your mic and ask a question, or if you feel more comfortable to write the question on the chat box, feel free to do so also.
May I, Rukmini?
Please. Shasha,
Yeah.
please
So,
go.
hi. Yeah, so this is not so much of, do I have to switch on my video?
That is
it's all right.
absolutely for you to see.
Yeah. So no, so mine is not merely a question, but an observation that I've also kind of come to realize over teaching all these years, is that particularly with visual as a method, and what we do in our department, that every year we do when we do our annual conference, we ask students to actually do an exhibition. Right, and it is for them to kind of conceptualize and all, and so, like, one we did on basically taking on from Berger and looking at basically 3 centuries of paintings and how women's bodies have been used. And that's a very early intervention. But recently, what we realized, so recently, last year, I think this year we did something else, but last year they did something on the senses, sensory sociology. And there we found that there was a lot of interaction that happened with non-sociology students. That given that this exhibition was an open space, and we invited everybody to come and have an experiential. So the room, a huge hall, we divided that into 5, the 5 sensory spaces. And what we found is that the conversation that we otherwise struggle with as sociologists, right? Particularly our students say that, ma'am, when everybody asks us that, what do you do and what is sociology, it becomes very difficult because we do so many things. And after that exhibition, they were like, ma'am, we could finally converse, because, when the others, non-sociology students from across the other department, they came into that space, right? And that's when they were like, now we know that what is sociology about, because this is not so, because it's also that undergraduate students, 19, 20 years, they're also a little more apprehensive about theories, right? There's a lot of inhibitions when we introduce them to theories and all. And I think that as pedagogues, we have a lot to now work with visuals, and that's just an observation, because that actually allows a lot of conversation, right? Not just within sociology classrooms, but outside with other non-sociology, and to make the discipline something that is then becomes much more accessible as a discipline, I guess. And that's, I think, is something that we as a community can think more of when we do visuals. Yeah, that's my 2 bit of like contribution.
Thank you so much, Ashwati. That's not 2 bits, that's years of
Sociology to BFT and MP course students, those who are having film, television, new media production as their main subject matter. So I'm teaching introduction to sociology for the first time to them. So in my sociology classroom for undergraduation, I'm using the tools like socially conscious rap or television advertisements and many other things, movies, cinemas, documentaries. So there we are able to analyze, talk about theories, perspectives, sociological concepts, and try to observe various sociological things there. Now here when I'm using cinema as a tool to the students who are having subject matter, the cinema itself as a subject matter. So I'm having a kind of question that what should be my pedagogical intervention be here. So like it should be about the construction of the art and craft and discussing the sociological syllabus that they have in the introduction to sociology, or it should be just like same sociology I'm teaching to undergrad students. So yes.
Thank you, Kaustubh. That makes a
Thank
lot
you.
of sense. Thank you. Anyone else? Maybe a last question, comment, interjection from anybody? Okay. If not, then I'll first.
Sorry, can I jump in?
Yes, Anisha, please go ahead.
Sorry, I can't get my video running because, I don't know how to do this on the phone. I had a very quick question. So when we are using visual material in class, one of my primary concerns is that how do we, frame that in a way that's not overwhelming to students? I ask this from experience because I have had material just be so immediate, so urgent that students haven't been able to engage with it productively. It's just becoming it's become overwhelming. I didn't hedge it enough, didn't cushion. I don't even use the word cushioning it because it makes it sound like my students are quote unquote fragile. They're not. They're just sensitive. They are, as they rightly should be, sensitive to that. And some of them do come from families and backgrounds where this is not theoretical, it's something they're seeing from a distance. But right. Yeah, if anyone had thoughts, insights, better ways to do this, I'd be really grateful.
Thanks so much, Anisha. And then there is another question that's coming from Rajmi Mohanto. And Rajmi is asking about what is the difference between digital and visual sociology? Are there points of convergences and differences? So I'll use my moderator, status to ask Priyasha to respond to the cinema question, ask Professor Dalia to respond to the digital and the visual sociology question, and ask Professor Gita Chadha to respond to the overwhelming presence of the visual in the classroom and how to handle that. Can I ask Dr. Priyasha Kaul to go first?
Hello, thank you so much, Professor Rukmini. Very interesting question. Can I just sort of, just to make sure that I've understood you correctly. So what the heart of what you were trying to ask was around the issue of teaching sociology to film studies students, is it? Yeah, okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right, that's a very interesting question. And increasingly, as of course, Professor Sen is here. At Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, we have always had, multidisciplinary classrooms, and with the NEP, so of course now that is increasingly so. So that is a question that we all have, are increasingly going to keep to deal with in the future as we move ahead. But let me sort of take it a step back and try and see if we can break down that question. So I teach a course on sociology of work, right? Which is nothing to do with visual sociology per se. So it starts off with the Industrial Revolution, and it talks about the industrial society, post-industrial society, the future of work, AI, the entire arc. What I found really interesting every year is while teaching, industrial society, particularly while teaching Karl Marx and capitalism and especially alienation, is using Charlie Chaplin Modern Factory. And just that montage where he goes through that machinery, gets sucked into it and goes through those gears, is the most visual, explicit sort of articulation of being a cog in the wheel. And it gets such an immediate sort of connect with the students, because it's not really about sort of telling them this is capitalism and this is alienation, but in the way in which it's actually sort of embodying that phenomenon in a very visual, visceral sort of a way, and also then being able to make connections. Now the issue, so as I was saying before, the idea of using visuals is useful in visual pedagogy is useful in most classroom settings. But as sociologists, what becomes even more interesting is that we are not just doing that, A, and B, what becomes even more sort of fascinating is that our purpose is to go beyond just that. So when we are dealing with students who are already film studies students, right? They are making films, they're filmmakers in the making, or may even be so already. I would think that actually it enables us to make that engagement a lot more explicit, because we, for a film studies person, for a filmmaker, you are often looking at film as cinema from a technical perspective. You're looking at it from the perspective of mise en scène, of scene construction, of camera angles, which is very important and crucial parts of any filmmaker's enterprise of bringing a visual together, a visual project together. And as sociologists, while that framing is very significant to us, what is even more interesting is that how does that framing come together and bring about a certain curated version of social reality? So to be able to kind of make that connection for students who are already sort of filmmakers, for students for whom the medium is not a new medium, and yet to be able to look beyond the technicalities and to be able to think about it as not just film or not just a cinema as a piece of art in itself, but as a piece of visual pedagogy, but pedagogically looking at a piece of cinema as a visual piece which is located, entrenched, and embedded within the larger social structures. So I think as sociologists, that is the interesting sort of pedagogical enterprise for us as teachers in the classroom. In that context, I hope that sort of
Yes,
answers.
ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for the explanation.
Thanks, Priyasha. I'll move over to Professor Chakrabarti for a quick reflection on digital and visual.
Yeah, actually, digital means, I mean, those who are, very much into some technology or science, they understand digital maybe differently. But from my perspective, what I understand or how we handle digital, that is information or devices and the process and the storing of data, use of internet and media, where content has been created and stored. So visuals can be stored, can be manipulated, can be kept. You can use visuals and you can show visuals through digital devices, just as we did in this kind of program. Also, I teach a course on making research presentation where my students use so many types of data visualization techniques they use, the tools they use various apps. So these are the advantages that we have through the digital media. But visual is beyond that. I mean, say for example, the Ajunta cave art, that is visual. I mean, that has nothing to do with digital, but the same visuals you can have through digital media, and you can also manipulate that in different ways, or you can share it in different ways. So there can be some interpenetration between the two, but these are not the same things. I mean, visuals can be beyond digital also. So for example, the Khajuraho, it's beyond digital also. But even that visual, if mediated by the digital media, then it becomes accessible. And it becomes, you can manipulate and you can reproduce. So all these have become possible. So these are the two things actually. Visuals and digitals are not same, but nowadays, because of the digital intervention, visuals are more accessible, more reproducible. So that helps in a way. Yes, that's it.
Thank you so much. Over to Professor Chadha.
Yeah, so I know we are running out of time, and I'm not quite sure, Anisha, whether I fully understood the question. I mean, I got the sense of it, but whatever if I don't sort of understand fully and address fully, we can have this conversation later also. There can be intensity at different levels of different kinds that the student comes with. Yeah. So my efforts have been, in fact, you'd be surprised that when I taught a paper in visual cultures, the master's course in Mumbai University, I didn't use too many visual modes of assessment. Funny. But on the other hand, in all my other regular sociology courses, regular feminist courses, I do bring in a lot of that. Now, the intensity, it's not just the visual. What I'm trying to say is that in the sociology classroom, if one wants to enhance the humanistic temper, if one wants to enhance literary imaginations, visual imaginations, we need to bring in a lot of other things. For example, I bring in the short story, writing a sociological short story. Now, our students are resistant. Whether they are undergraduate students or postgraduate students, they are diffident, they are resistant because they are not used to writing in a certain fashion. They are not used to thinking that, oh, visual is a part of sociology. There are enough, and the environment of teaching sociology and learning sociology is such that you give me facts, you give me arguments, you give me theories, and I'm struggling. I'm sure Rukmini also does it as feminist sociologist. When we need to bring in lived experience, when we need to bring in affect, when we need to bring in sensuality, the struggle is huge because the environment, I mean, a lot of people around me would be, feeding the students and saying, ye kya hai, ye sociology thodi hai, So to convince the student that this is not, that this is sociology, that theory gets built from here, expression and a sociological imagination gets strengthened from here, is a very big challenge. The intensity and the tiredness and the fatigue that private university students feel, oh my God, they are overburdened. They have so much to do and deliver in a short semester of 5 courses. Each course has 4 assessments. Sometimes I feel guilty, imposing this extra. And the questions that come is, why should I do this? Let me just do a PowerPoint presentation and finish. Right? So the task of persuasion is not an easy one. It is a very difficult one. But I think if you have a certain institutional support, if you have your students, if you build a care-based pedagogy, they come around. And yet you have to give in. There are times I have to say, all right, because, there was one very interesting, and I quickly, Rukmini will share this. So very interesting experience that I had, I think it was last year, where one of the girl students said that, why are you imposing? So I was working with the idea of theater of the oppressed. Okay, that was something that I was bringing in the classroom along with the vision. So they said, why are you bothering us? Literally, some of us don't know how to act. We don't want to act. We don't like theater. We don't want to do it. And then my only question was, there are many people who cannot do in this classroom, cannot do a PowerPoint. They come read off from the PowerPoint and they suffer in the gradation. What about them? Maybe there will be more embodiment and entering of the knowledge than you. And you won't believe it, because this assignment was combined with an autoethnographic essay. The same student came back and said, I saw the point. Because there are students who hate writing, but who blossomed in the theater space. Yeah. So it's all, Anisha, I'm really sorry. I don't know whether that's an answer to your question. It's a struggle. But it works most of the time.
And it will remain a struggle, I would think. Just the last thoughts.
Yeah.
That, using, good to see you, Anisha, using or experimenting with pedagogy and experimenting with pedagogies like the visual, which are more dense, deep, and maybe sometimes more intimate also, does lead to probably other forms of trouble, which may not be the case with using mere numbers, or just trying to do a pie chart of what starvation deaths look like. There's definitely a huge difference between using that photograph that Gita used of the Bhopal gas tragedy, with if we just read that these were the number of people who died as a result of that catastrophe. There's a huge difference. So I do think that the use of the visual necessarily disrupts. It disrupts something. While it is, pushing the boundaries of sociological imagination, it is also disrupting the way in which conventionally sociology has been practiced, and in some ways also continues to be practiced. So there is a way in which maybe all of us would want to think that how is it that when we want to use the visual as a pedagogy, how is it that we are also in some ways making the student deal with that visual, to embrace that in a certain way. There's a lot to be talked about there, probably. But I do think that this was a wonderful interaction. It was a wonderful conversation.
I just want to add something, Rukmini.
Yes, ma'am, please.
In one of my making research presentation class, I have a disabled student. She understands things, but she sometimes takes time to understand, and her response is also very, very slow. But what I have found is, in his conventional written exam, she did very poorly. I mean, just the average. Sometimes we give her marks like that. But in case of this visual kind of presentation, when she is using various techniques, she does very well. I mean, in one such 10 marks assessment, I give her 9. It's like that. I mean, she excelled actually. Her presentation is better than others. So, as Professor Gita Chadha says, that there are people with different abilities, and sometimes visuals helps them to use those different abilities and excel also. I mean, it's not necessarily that writing is the only way, or even speaking is the only way. I mean, there are different modes of expression, and sometimes through visuals we express better.
Thank you so much. Going back to Joan Scott's experiences method always helps, in some ways to bring together many of these conversations. I'll end this part of the proceedings, and I will hand it over back to Professor Leena Pujari to take it forward and towards conclusion. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to moderate this wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rukmini, and you did a wonderful job the way you brought everything together. And thank you to each one of the panelists. I think each one of you brought so much to the table. It was a pleasure listening to each one of you. And Geeta, when I was planning this, one thing that kept coming back to me was this: that what would the visual mean for someone who cannot see? And thank you so much for flagging that, for saying it. I know we are running short of time, and before I invite Shivani to deliver the vote of thanks, may I invite Professor Satish Sharma? Sir, you have just 5 minutes. We'll be happy to hear you speak. May I invite you, please? You are muted, sir. You're muted.
Good evening, everyone. And I'm really, first of all, I apologize for joining late because of some technical glitch, which I could finally solve. And I must begin with my note of appreciation for each of the panelists and the moderator for wonderful deliberations and touching upon some of the areas which have been neglected in sociology and also in other disciplines. As far as visual studies are concerned, I have been working of late on this particular thing and using the expression visual as a text and method. And when I say visual as text, then a visual needs to be understood by getting into the details of each and every aspect. Even like in forensic sciences, the angles, the colors, the expression of eyes, or if it is a landscape, then one has to put it in a broader framework within a frame and beyond the frame, as Simal has been talking about the visual expressions. But one thing which is very important and very, very interesting, I find, is that there is a lot of interest which people are taking in the study of visuals nowadays, although globally the studies in visuals started as early as 14th century, if I go back to the history of knowledge. But then, of course, lately in India also we have started doing it, and we were lucky to get it included in the Indian Sociological Society's program at the moment as a ad hoc group. And I thank my co-convener in this endeavor, Professor Vaishali Divakar. She has been doing a lot of work. But what I understand from visuals, in very few words, that they are reflexive of culture and structural realities of society, and they are dynamic in nature and conditioned by the advancements in material aspects of the society, science and technology, and along with these addition in science and technology, we also see there is a change in the form of visual expressions. For example, we have been referring to sculptures in Khajuraho or elsewhere, and from idols to digital media, which has become very, very popular, which is now highly dependent upon the technology. And earlier, it was a kind of art, creativity, human ingenuity, which was, able to involve. So what is, therefore, when I say that the visual needs to be studied in details, then one must also try to understand the structure of consciousness of the creator of the visual. With what kind of consciousness the particular type of visual is created. And that's where we will be able to understand the intent in that particular visual and what the message it tries to convey. So therefore, being the creation of individuals, there will also be questions about subjectivity. But those subjectivity, the question of subjectivity can be solved by subjecting the visual to the time and the context dimension aspect of that visual. And then, for example, if there was a visual showing protest. No, it's not something new, but protest therefore also has historicity. So one has to go back to history. So therefore, it's a very complex phenomenon, and the complexities of visuals can be resolved only by understanding each and every dimension of it. And in totality, visual expressions also form a language, a text, and they are a kind of a method of analysis of culture and structure. And therefore, both the processes of reconstruction and deconstruction, they are involved in the entire process. So it's a vast subject which needs a lot of time to deliberate upon, but it's very, very important that with the effort of you, particularly in collaboration with Professor Divakar, and also the panelists, that this particular discussion has enriched us all. And I thank everyone and look forward for such deliberations in the future also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And as you rightly said, we've all been enriched by the discussions today. It's been a long session, and as it draws to a close, may I invite Shivani Rajput to deliver the vote of thanks.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Pujari. Before thanking the panelists, I just want to say that this is one of my favorite group, and I keep looking forward to its lecture. And some people might judge me attending Friday evening, listening to pedagogy of visual, but I think it's very enriching. So thank you everyone for sharing the insight. And it also makes you feel as a teacher that the education system is such that you are trained to do your research and do a PhD, but teaching, it's like you're thrown over there and you just have to figure out on your own. So a group like this really makes you feel that there are people who are facing similar challenge, teaching visual. For example, one thing which I often encounter in my classes, I show them a photograph of a duck or a rabbit or a duck, and until or unless it's not written what is the image, some students would say they have seen a rabbit, some would say they have seen a duck. So it is very complex, and I think today's lecture is a great reminder that there is no escape from dealing with visual in sociology as pedagogy or as research, and how do we engage with it. So thank you everyone. Thank you ISS for organizing this, RC32, Professor Pujari, co-convener Rupa, Mamta, and ad hoc group 2 visual sociology, Professor Sharma and Professor Divakar, and of course our mentor Professor Rukmini Sen, and our panelists Dr. Kaul, Professor Dalmi, and Professor Chadha. It was really, at least for me, my evening was very enriching. So thank you all for giving us your time and really sharing your insights from the classroom itself. Thanks a lot.
Leena, if you can give me just 1 minute, Professor Sandeep Chaudhary, Managing Committee Member of ISS, has been around the entire time. Thank you very much, Sandeep, for being around.
Oh, hello, Professor Sandeep. I didn't notice. So nice. Thank you for joining Yeah. I can see him now.
I'm sorry, I think I forgot to thank Boino and Marcus also.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your support. Yeah.
Hello
Hello,
to everybody.
Hello, Professor. Thank
Yeah,
you
yeah.
for being
Thank
here.
you, Rukmini ji and Leena ji.
Thank you for joining, Sajani. Lovely. And to those of you who, people who are not here, I'm sure they will be able to watch the recording, which will be put up on the social media platforms. Thank you so much. It was a lovely evening listening to each one of you. Such rich discussions. Really. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Good night. Good night. Good
Bye.
night.